We're trying to build a very inclusive movement, but really recognizing the lack of funding going specifically to gender.
It's just whatever speaks to my heart. I tend to give in locally quite a bit.
If you're going to work like this, find out what they need and what you can do to help them.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbé. Welcome to the Contrary. This week, we speak with three leading women philanthropists who are changing the lives of women across the world. I'm joined by one of the most prominent women in the field, Jacki Zehner. Jacki, welcome. You know we've been waiting to talk to you for a long time, so we're very excited about this.
I'm so honored to be here, Bonnie. Thank you for having me.
So first of all, your background. You were a partner at Goldman Sachs, the first woman.
Well, the first woman trader. Technically the youngest woman, though at the time, but that was back in 1996. So I can't believe that's 20 years ago.
What was the spark that initiated you into the world of women in philanthropy? Why did you, go? Not everyone who makes a lot of money on Wall Street becomes philanthropic.
You know, my passion for women's issues, ironically enough, really did start at Goldman Sachs. I was very lucky to have a great job. I love my job as a trader, but of course, we were not in the majority in terms of women on the trading floor. And I love my job. I loved the opportunities that it created for me, but I kept asking this question of where are all the other women? So I got very, very involved in the recruiting efforts at Goldman Sachs and actually worked with other amazing women at Goldman to set up our first women's leadership and inclusion efforts way back in the early 90s, and just started to get obsessed with this question of where are the women? So it's really there that my passions were ignited.
And you co-founded Women Moving Millions. Tell our viewers about what that is and what you do, and again, that's taking it to quite another level to start, help start and co-found an organization of that size. Just
this September, we celebrate the 10th year since this initiative was started, and it was started by two amazing women, Helen LaKelly Hunt and Swanee Hunt, two sisters from Dallas, and in partnership with another woman, Chris Grum of the Women's Funding Network. So it was actually started in 2007 before I became formally involved as this amazing sparking of idea to encourage women to make gifts of $1 million or more to women-led organizations. And Helen, who was really the driving force behind this idea, had been doing some work in women in philanthropy and women leadership, and had really noticed that there were very few $1 million gifts to women-led causes, despite what we were hearing at the time, now 10 years ago, this huge wealth transfer that was happening of women stepping into amazing capacity. And of course, big gifts were being made, but often to more traditional organizations, and one that we say now that didn't necessarily employ a gender lens. So Helen had this idea to put the word million, women, and giving, 3 words, all together, and that was this initiative called Women Moving Millions. So now, 10 years later, I became a member as part of the first campaign, and I've really taken a leadership role for the past 7 years to grow this community into what we're saying now a movement, which is to step forward and encourage women to make big and bold gifts in support of women and girls.
Now tell me about the work. What are you doing with the money that you get from the donors?
Yeah, we actually don't get the money. It doesn't come through us or to us. So each member designates which organizations get that gift. So it can be 1, it can be 100. So it's $1 million over a maximum of a 10-year period. For one woman, her issues may be related to ending the trafficking against women, or domestic violence, or even breast cancer, or women's economic empowerment. For another, it might be a completely different portfolio. So each member brings with her her unique passions and skills. They choose where that money goes. And our work is to support and really develop and amplify their individual and our collective leadership.
You know, getting down to like the street level, tell me about what you think the most amazing things are that women have done with this money to help
women and girls.
Obviously, the stories of impact are incredible. I guess one that I would lift up as both an individual and a collective story of impact is, and again, there are hundreds if not thousands of these, but I'll lift up a story of this organization called Toast On. So Toast On is a nonprofit based in Senegal, Africa, but founded by an American woman 40 years ago when she moved to Senegal. And Senegal uses sort of human-centered design, but really community-oriented empowerment, but has really been focusing on ending the practice of female genital cutting across West Africa. A few of our members who've done incredible homework found this organization, had been supporting them, and said, we're going to work together to grow our donor base of individuals for Toast On. So the head of Toast On came to speak at a Women Moving Millions event. I, in fact, heard her. I was literally in the back of the room, like chills, when she talked about how they do their work. 6 months later, I was in Senegal with my 13-year-old daughter, really visiting them on the ground, and I've since become a donor. And now we have many, many members that are $1 million donors to Toast On. So, and that's without ever really being pitchy or forcefully, you know, it's just you open up this incredible organization to a group of people and magic happens.
That sounds fabulous.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Now, do you ever get pushback because you're so female focused?
Many of us do support organizations like the Center for Men and Masculinities by Michael Kimmel at SUNY College, and A Call to Men started by Ted Bunch and Tony Porter. So seeing the harmful effects of gender norms associated with masculinity, obviously having a direct impact and intersection with, you know, the lives of women and girls. But you know, we're trying to right an imbalance in the work that we do. People say, why not just $1 million to any organization? Why does it have to be female focused? And it gets back to the roots of why Women Moving Millions exists, which is that such a small percentage of overall philanthropic dollars, recently measured 15-ish%, though I expect over the past few years it's increased, especially due to efforts like ours. But a small percentage of funding actually goes to women and girls, despite us being half the population and arguably having more of a need given, you know, issues like girls' education, maternal health, you know, violence against women, obviously much higher than violence against men. So we have a huge need, and yet capital coming to the market to address these is not balanced. So when that's more balanced, perhaps we'll back off our efforts. And of course, any member is free to give to any cause she wants outside of her commitment or his commitment through Women Moving Millions. And being for women and girls is never about being against men and boys. We see partnerships everywhere, and we're trying to build a very inclusive movement, but really recognizing the lack of funding going specifically to gender as it relates to females.
Right. When we did a story more than 20 years ago about how women give versus how men give, men were more likely to give to their alma mater or you know, some sports team or something like that, whereas women are more likely to help education, health, children, right, particularly, even before the, you know, women-focused philanthropic movement. Does that still exist today?
I think it does, yeah. I mean, again, I'm sort of leaning on some research as well as my own experience. I think in my own experience, there tends to be a really wanting to help marginalized people, and often women, and I think it's very true in our community, come from such a place of personal narrative as being perhaps victims of violence in particular, and seeing, you know, the need to support victims, frankly, as such a big part of, you know, their connection into the philanthropic space once they have significant resources. But yes, I think, you know, again, our members fund such a wide variety of organizations, but there tends to be a lot of support for that direct need, direct focus on health, access to clean water, access to safety. A lot of work now happening around even this intersection of social enterprise and women's economic empowerment. So not just sort of be this charity-oriented mentality, but a really deep commitment to help build women's agency and their ability to make money and provide for their families.
You've talked about a new frontier for women as angel investors. Tell me about that, please.
Yes, it's one of our members, amazing Ruth Ann Harnish, calls finance the new frontier of feminism. And I love that quote because it's sort of saying, let's not just show up with our time and our talents, but when there's big capacity, also with finance, with the tools of finance. And of course, one of the tools of money is to give. Another tool we have is how we spend our money with daily purchasing decisions in goods and services, so our consumer power. And the third one is invest. Where do we put our investment capital? So this whole emerging area now, which I'm super passionate about, the gender lens investing or gender impact investing, is something our community and independently I'm putting a lot of time and effort into, not just personally, how do I personally employ a gender lens across my investment portfolio, but how to build the platform and build the knowledge base within our Women Moving Millions community and more broadly for anyone to invest with gender impact, because of course that just accesses literally trillions and trillions of dollars of capital versus a more limited philanthropic pool.
And if I can interrupt just for a second,
sure.
Explain, please, gender lens. Anybody can imagine what that means,
thank you.
What does it specifically mean to you?
Well, for me, with a gender lens, especially it relates to investing, is being mindful of the impact of my investment capital to the lives of women and girls. So wanting to use it as a force of positive change in empowering and supporting and advancing females. So one might say at its simplest form, if you're buying public equities with a gender lens, you might be mindful of the work-life policies that that company has or what percentage of women they have on corporate boards, and perhaps choose to not invest in a company that does not have a critical mass of women in leadership positions, specifically on their board. That's one way. The other way you mentioned is thinking about how we support women entrepreneurs through angel investing. So sadly, I'm a kind of a research geek, but women venture capital seekers get less than 10% of venture capital dollars. Now, there may be a lot of reasons to explain that, but not enough to justify what is inevitably a gender bias against women in receiving venture capital. So one thing we as women can do is think about deploying a certain amount of capital, if we have that ability, investing in women entrepreneurs to right that imbalance.
You say that in gender investing, not all impact can be measured, it has to be judged.
Well, I always think about the impact in terms of what's appropriate given a certain organization, right? And what's the right time frame. Because I work, so much of the work of gender and women's advancement is long-term social change work. So you trust the leader of the organization a lot of the time, and you just, pause to just think. I think some of us are so busy looking at numbers a lot of the time, so we don't pull back and really stretch our imaginations in terms of what's possible. And I think a lot about artist support these days. I do a lot of issue and work in social issue documentary. And storytelling is about changing hearts and minds. And you think about the power of stories. It's worth thinking with your heart and your head, and it's time we put those two just more strongly together and put them back into philanthropy in equal measure.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you for the work that you do, and best of luck to you in everything you do from here on out.
Thank you, Bonnie. So lovely to be here.
Another female philanthropist changing the game is Lynda Weinman of lindawithy.com. If you ever needed help learning a computer graphics program or just about anything digital, you're familiar with the mega site Lynda co-founded with her husband. It was purchased by LinkedIn for $1.5 billion, and much of that went to investors, Ms. Weinman is quick to point out, but she has used her share for good.
I started it actually at age 40, so I know that is encouraging to a lot of people who are starting later in life. We never dreamed that it would be what it became. It started really as a book, and then the book expanded into a way to recruit students to come to a classroom. So it started brick and mortar, and then it morphed into being online and putting lessons online on online video before YouTube. So we were very early, but we're able to, collect a huge, passionate audience.
After selling Lynda.com, Weinman and her husband, Bruce Haven, decided to focus their efforts on giving.
My husband, who got us into one of our large areas of philanthropy, which is about sexual abuse, which is not only a women's issue, but it is a very large women's issue. And we're highly supportive of an organization in Los Angeles that's associated with UCLA, the LARape.org, and Stewart House, which is changing the way that sexual abuse victims are treated in hospitals and intake situations, and especially children who get repetitively injured because they have to keep retelling their story over and over again, and it's highly traumatic. And so it's a visionary program that we support, and that was actually my husband that got us into that.
Many donors set up family foundations, but Weinman says that wasn't the right model for her and Haven.
Because if you have a foundation, then you are tied to bylaws, you're tied to a board approvals. And how it's been explained to me is you would want to have a foundation if you have a mission and you want to run it and you want to control it, and you want to have all the leadership and management around that idea and the execution of the idea. And I think for us, because we had already done this major company, that was not appealing.
She wanted more flexibility and to support a variety of organizations and causes.
We chose to open instead a donor advised fund, which is where you give the money in advance of when you're going to give it away. You're actually allowed to give it away at any point during your lifetime. You can set money aside. You get the tax deduction when you set the money aside, but then it can be given away as long as it is ultimately given to a 501c3. It can be given away at any point in time. So we sort of have a holding fund that is, very easy to access. You just write a grant, and you do not have to go through board approval or have a giving guideline or a lot of the other kinds of bureaucratic red tape involvement in other kinds of funds and instruments.
Weinman says being a woman definitely informs her giving.
I have, in the last couple of years since we sold Lynda.com, become very passionate about independent filmmaking. And I've aligned with Sundance and gone through a couple of their workshops where they've teamed potential investors with independent filmmakers who are in need of funding. And that's something that I've done without my husband, but he's supportive of it.
Many of those films focus on women's issues.
Either, human rights or sexual violence, around learning. But I think it's just whatever speaks to my heart. I tend to give in locally quite a bit. We live in Santa Barbara, and so there are a number of different women's organizations that we support there. Everything from Planned Parenthood to Women Economic Ventures, which is an organization that trains, does a lot of education, helping women to start businesses. There's Girls Inc. I find personally that when I'm giving money to filmmakers, that is a very personal and direct influence that I can have over something, like to realize that you're responsible for bringing a film into the world. There's something about it that's extremely gratifying, and it reminds me a lot of Lynda.com being responsible for bringing those courses into the world and, shepherding some of the films along.
Funding has been a barrier for women filmmakers, so Weinman finds it gratifying to help propel female filmmakers into the industry.
We're starting to see it happen in quite a few of the films that I have supported. Are first-time women directors or women directors and writers. And women have been producers far longer, but I think there's a great new group of women filmmakers, and they're getting the funding that they need, which is great.
Since the inauguration of Donald Trump as president, many foundations and philanthropists have stepped up their giving to women, girls, and the underserved. Weinman has made that a part of her philanthropic mission.
I think it has. I don't know that it's fully kicked in. I definitely increased our donation to Planned Parenthood this year, joined the ACLU, joined the ADL, and imagine that we'll increase our funding to Boys and Girls Club and Girls Inc. and some of the programs that support underserved communities in our local area. But it is also, we've been witnessing the decline of public support for the arts for a very long time. And even under the Obama years and before, we were seeing cuts to high school programs, and there's been this, which I think is a very unfortunate movement away from the arts in schools. And so supporting the arts in general, I think, is extremely important, and it does fall on the shoulders of philanthropists right now.
Now, how one philanthropist who's also a doctor is using her philanthropy to help cure African women of fistula. Dr. Mary Lake Polan is a rare person. She's an obstetric surgeon who ran the Stanford University OB-GYN unit and now teaches at Yale. She has a new book out about becoming a force to help female victims of fistula in Africa.
Dr. Mary Lake Polan flew to Eritrea, she thought, to talk to a health service official there about offering to help with breast cancer.
I flew to Eritrea, talked to him, and he looked at me and he said, "We have no mammogram units, so looking at breast cancer is not really possible, and we have no pathologists to read pap smears, so that's out too. What we do need is somebody who can repair holes between your bladder and your vagina, or your rectum and your vagina, from childbirth damage. And if you can do that, we'd love to have you help."
She went back to Stanford to ask her team about performing free fistula surgery for thousands of Eritrean women whose lives are ruined by difficult, usually first, deliveries.
They occur because, remember, when you deliver a baby, the head comes down into the pelvis, and the pelvis is ringed by bones, and the symphysis, the anterior pelvis, the baby's head pushes against that. And if for some reason you can't deliver, the baby's too big, the pelvis is too small, then the pressure against the symphysis kills the tissue. And you have, what's left is a hole and a leak between the bladder and the vagina. If the pressure is on the rectal side, the posterior side, then you have a rectal vaginal fistula and you leak stool.
She says fistula isn't just a problem in Eritrea or even just in Africa.
It's women in resource-low settings where there is not an adequate obstetrical care and labor and delivery care. And in fact, in New York City, before we had surgical procedures to deliver babies, there was a fistula hospital. So this is really not related to where you live, it's related to what your medical resources are. 100,000 fistulas that occur annually, most of them in Africa, Southeast Asia, and some in Central and South America.
Fistula is a condition that destroys marriages and the woman's ability to earn a living, even to go back to her family for support.
You can imagine, if you leak urine and feces, you smell, your clothes are dirty, people don't want to be around you. You can't go to work because nobody wants to be with you, and your husband may not want to be with you. Most of the women who have this problem, well, for example, in Eritrea, 80% of the women were delivered in their homes, outside of any physician or midwifery care, and the women are then ostracized. Their husbands leave them. In most cases, the babies die, so they don't have children, and they're a burden to their family.
Dr. Polan and her team were able to save 1,000 women over the more than 15 years she traveled to Eritrea. One special woman's situation really warmed her heart.
Hansu came in 2004, and the women come from all over the country. I mean, it's a country of 4 to 5 million people. They take buses, they come on donkeys. If you go outside the capital, you see women riding camels, but they come to us, and she came from a distance away. She was leaking. It was impossible to fix the hole, and so the surgeons did a diversion procedure on her. We keep the women for several weeks or a month or two until they're healed, and then they go back to their homes. She went home and she came back 3 years later with a beautiful baby boy. She had not only gotten pregnant once and had a miscarriage, she got pregnant again, and she delivered that baby vaginally after the big abdominal surgery she'd had.
Dr. Polan became so involved with fistula patients, she raised money to build a center for the women who come to the hospital to wait for surgery there.
We thought we could raise enough money to build a fistula waiting home in the hospital in Mendefera. And so we worked with UNFPA and Friends of UNFPA, because you need not only the Ministry of Health and the physicians from the United States, but you really need a UN partner to do anything in the developing world. And we were able to raise enough money, and we built a 40-bed waiting home.
Thank you for joining us this week. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.